watching Morning at NTV.
20 minutes to the top of the hour, 8 a.m. Tuesday is a good day across East Africa. And this morning on our Kickstart, we're going to be looking at the role of the judiciary in deepening democracy, not just in Uganda, but all of Africa. Is it possible? I believe that in one way or another, we have seen a glimpse of light with what has just transpired in Kenya in the past few hours. And so there is a ray of hope in deepening democracy. My name is Priscilla Regina Naloga, and welcome to our Kickstarter. Now, constitutions envision a governance system founded on the values of human rights, rule of law, social justice, and public participation. The fundamental ideology of entrenching and promoting democracy policy framework and subnational development policies is in there. And of course, the political pillars seek the establishment of a democratic governance system that is issue-based, people-centered, result-oriented, and accountable to the public. African lawyers have an enlightened self-interest in consolidating democracy because lawyers function optimally in a constitutional democracy. And looking back to what has just transpired in Kenya over the course of the month, we want to create a picture of how judiciary is able to strengthen democracy, especially in African states, but more so drawing from Uganda. Benjamin Katana, who is a lawyer, gets to join us for this conversation, as well as Martin Wanjala, who's the Executive Director for African Youth Development Link. I'll start with Council. Good morning to you, Benjamin.
Good morning, Priscilla.
You're most welcome.
Thank you for inviting us to discuss this very important topic. And greetings to all the viewers of NTV. Okay.
Martin, good morning to you. Glad to be here.
Good morning, Priscilla, and thank you for having me to also add my voice and the voice of the young people to this important conversation.
Okay. All right. Let's look at Kenya. It's been close to a month of this whole election process. On 9th August, Kenyans went to the polls, and we must say they had a free, calm, and a fair election. However, the losing end did not take it lightly, and so they went to the courts to seek justice in what they thought was some discrepancies here and there. I'll start with you, Mr. Katana. In terms of the petitions and how it was handled by the 7 judges, including the Chief Justice, what do you draw in terms of discussing transparency of the procession in the Apex Court?
Thank you very much. First of all, is to emphasize that judiciary is a very important actor in the democratization process as the final arbiter, especially in the electoral processes, as the final arbiter in disputes relating to the elections. And for the judiciary to be able to perform that role, it also needs a high level of public confidence and trust. So I would also like to add that that public confidence and trust is earned over time. It doesn't just come. And so what we witnessed in Kenya is that we had all the actors committing to respect the outcome of the court process on account of the track record of that court and the level of public confidence in that court and the judiciary generally. And so we saw a very peaceful process. The petitioners were able to gather their evidence, file their petition without any interference from any of the state agencies. The respondents who in this election, particularly the declared winner, appeared to be, during the campaigns, campaigning against the state establishment, had the opportunity to gather evidence without any interference from state agencies. If they were there, they were subtle and not in the open. We did not see any of his witnesses or agents being arrested or harassed. And I think that's why people had confidence in that process. So in terms of the ruling, of course, they have not yet given a comprehensive reasoning behind or the basis of their ruling. but it was largely on the basis of lack of sufficient and credible evidence filed by the petitioner. Probably when the comprehensive judgment is out, then we'll be able to go through all this very well. But even the people that did not agree, the petitioners, much as, of course, they were not happy with the ruling, but they didn't seem to question the independence of the Supreme Court of Kenya. So in terms of lessons learned as Uganda, is that for us to have a thriving democracy, we need to invest in separation of powers. We need to make sure that the judiciary, because you see, one of the cornerstones of democracy is that there should be separation of powers between the three arms of government, among the three arms of government. That is the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. They mutually support each other, but they should be able to exercise their mandate without interference from the other. And so the current challenge that we face, where you find that you have a fusion of the executive controlling the legislature, controlling the judiciary. And you don't even need to, to write a thesis about that. Just a quick, random interaction with the people on the street will tell you, oh no, the executive here controls the judiciary, it controls the legislature. And this, even if you go on a very comprehensive research, you'll be able to confirm. But also the decisions that have been given over time on some of the sticky issues will show you that there is some level of lack of independence on the part of the institutions of the state, like the arms of the state, like the legislature and the judiciary. So for us to be able to have a thriving democracy, then we must invest in making sure that there is proper separation of powers, there is independence of the judiciary, and the institutions are allowed to operate with minimal interference. I'll just give one example from Kenya. In the affidavit of the chairman of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, Wafula Chebukati, in response to the petition, he claims that the IGP of Kenya and other members of the National Security Council even attempted to intimidate him, to subvert the will of the people, which he resisted. And in my opinion, he was able to do so because he knew that in the environment in which he's operating, he's able to exercise independence and go away with it. But if he was operating in a toxic environment, like ours, where you have seen people being, the witnesses being arrested, people disappearing, I don't think any actor would have the confidence to say no to such level of intimidation from the security agency.
All right, thank you so much, Council. Turning to you, Martin, with what Council has submitted, the separation of powers, the independence, but more so the transparency of that independence of the different, systems that have aided Kenya to reach this point today as of date, and of course the judiciary being at the top of this conversation this morning. What do you make of what has transpired so far? Is it satisfactory according to you?
I think it is, Priscilla, because like Council has submitted, in any democracy, first of all, at the very core of the tenets of democracy is the need for transparency and a respect for the independence of each and every arm of government. That is something that we have seen very much at play during the Kenyan election. We saw institutions being, allowed to play their role. He made mention of the fact that the police, for example, was allowed to do its role unhindered and uninfluenced. The role of we saw a separation of the role of the security agencies, the role of the IEBC, was very clear, very clearly demarcated. The role of the security very clearly demarcated, and the role of the even when the judiciary came into play, there was no such thing as, you know, like you mentioned, witness tampering, intimidation, and all these things, and which have been characteristic of most elections, including in our own backyard, where, you know, different people have accused state agencies of, you know, playing double standards and with the respect of the independence of the judiciary. Like Council mentioned, especially towards the end of his admission, you could see that the different actors were acting with confidence simply because they were assured that after I have done what I have done, I don't risk being, you know, taken away in a drone or something, and so and that is very, very important, especially in a charged election like the one that has just ended.
Okay,
Yeah.
Councillor Katana, in this whole conversation, there's been the word rule of law, and many Ugandans have heard this over and over again. Could you give us a definition of what rule of law means in this whole process?
Maybe I should just break it down. That when we talk about rule of law, first of all is to mean that nobody is above the law, and that every action of individuals or of entities is guided by the law. For example, if you're the police force, that your operations and your actions are guided by the Constitution and what is contained in every relevant legislation. If you are courts of law, that your actions are guided by the law. That if you're the head of state, your actions are guided by the law. And that nobody is above the law, and that the law treats every person equally. There is no law for the rich person and law for the poor person. There is no law for the mighty, there is no law for the weak. It is the law of the land, and everyone respects it, irrespective of their status and strength in society. So these are some of the indicators. And of course, there has to be accountability, open governance, protection of human rights, and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. All right. We saw the rule of law actually applying, especially during the elections themselves. After people had cast their vote, the law that requires the IEBC to take up to 7 days to count all the votes and be able to compile and get the final results within the 7 days. But within those 7 days, there was so much pressure. And here in Uganda, people were saying, even us in 4 hours, you first declare the president, and then you start the counting. But we have seen the evidence of the application of rule of law for Kenya to actually reach this point, and all parties being satisfied with what has come out because of the application of the rule of law, which then begs the question, many politicians in Uganda actually feel justice is never been served, or it should be for them only if it is affecting them, but it shouldn't be for the general Ugandan, or it shouldn't be for all the stakeholders that are part of processes such as the electoral process in any given country. And Martin, what do you make of the rule of law application to self-justification?
I think in the application of the rule of law, Priscilla, it all comes down to what our land friends call the law of precedent. I think, like he mentioned, in order for the justice system to be respected and all, confidence has to be built over time. And if over time the system has shown that there are more cases where the law has been applied selectively in the favor of one of the sides, then that there are more of those cases than there are cases where the law has been applied equitably. I think that is what brings in an element where people begin to question. But like he mentioned, confidence in systems, in institutions, is built over time. And as a country, we have been given a chance over time to build this confidence in the public around the institutions, around the independence of the different institutions, and many a time we have been found wanting. But at the end of the day, there are quite important lessons, like Council has mentioned, that we can draw from the Kenyan election, that we can apply in our electoral system to make sure that it is free and fair, and most importantly, inclusive.
Okay, Councillor Katana, we can't change what happened for us here in 2021. However, so many things happened, especially in terms of something that you've mentioned, separation of powers in the three arms that do govern the country or do aid democracy in the country. Now, moving forward, we do have some years to 2026. How do we remedy the separation of power in a country such as Uganda?
Well, it takes many actors and many interventions. Drawing from the lessons of Kenya, you see, we are only, maybe 20, 25 years ago, Kenya was where we are today. Under the presidency of Arap Toltich Moi, you had political opponents harassed, beaten, civic and political space stifled. The Honorable Raila Odinga spent, I think, almost 8 years in jail, but they worked very hard. The likes of him, the likes of his father, the likes of Kenneth Matiba, Mwai Kibaki, they worked very hard and built pressure on the system. And eventually, they are where they are. So there are no two ways. The push for democratization in Uganda must be continued. There are no two ways. Of course, it takes also the goodwill of the leader. And while I would say that many times General Museveni has been presented with the opportunity to reach his Damascus, which opportunity he has not utilized, since he's still alive and is still the head of state, he still has the chance. Just like Moi did. For so many years, Moi was looked at as a devil. But towards the end of his presidency, by accepting to encourage his anointed successor, first of all, to encourage to step down, and to encourage his anointed successor, Uhuru Kenyatta, to concede when he was defeated. That was his Damascus point. He continued to live in Kenya, a peaceful man, and died from Kenya without running into exile. Regardless of all his sins, the actions of his last days redeemed him, but also enabled Kenya to attain the gains it has attained in democracy. So you asked me that what must be done. What must be done is for those who seek change in this country, who believe in democracy, to continue struggling and building pressure. And it doesn't have to be the political actors only. It can be the church, it can be the civil society, it can be the students, and all the people of Uganda that believe that Uganda can do better than it is doing today, to work together and make sure that they build necessary pressure. Leaders who have stayed in power for a long time and have amassed a lot of power, like General Museveni, cannot think about relinquishing power without pressure, because it's some form of addiction. And when they are comfortable, then they have no reason to think about relinquishing power and allowing democracy and institutions to operate independently. But those that believe in democracy must work hard, harder than we are working now, build pressure, and then that pressure will compel him to think about departure. He cannot on his own volition, without any pressure, unless he gets a dream from God, think about relinquishing power. At least the experiences that we have seen in the world suggest that. And I've used that example of Kenya, that Moi had a very strong grip on the nation. But there was a lot of pressure from trade unions. He was always fighting with teachers, from the church, from the political actors, the examples I've mentioned, and eventually he gave in and allowed democracy to take its course. So there cannot be two ways. Democracy is never handed on a silver platter.
So, Councillor Katana, you're saying that pressure should be exerted from every end of the country for us to see this kind of change that you speak about. But
yes,
if that happens,
also
then people must be ready to sacrifice, because
certainly
some sort of sacrifice will be required, because people will disappear.
Certainly.
Which, again, separation of power. It goes back to where we are. People will be normal. People will mysteriously die, again, because they're trying to exert that kind of pressure to lead us into that democracy that is governed strictly, or more so, by the rule of law that we're talking about. Now, speaking of rule of law, let me turn to Martin. In Uganda, we are failing to understand the importance of a certain rule called presidential term limit. Tojikwata caused people to fight in parliament. Tojikwata caused government or certain people to put money in influencers' accounts so that Tebajikwata you get. Why? Because they want to continue the presidency of the current regime. Therefore, if we are not having separation of power, at what point do we as Ugandans expect that what has guided Kenya, which is the rule of law, which is the presidential term limits, 8 years tops, and you are out. Whatever you have done or not done will be done by your successor. That is not something that we have in Uganda here. So minus that, do you actually see us achieving what Katana is referring to?
I would say yes and no. No, because if we don't invest in what we call conscientization, and that is it relates a little bit to what he mentioned about building pressure, but also more about conscious raising amongst the people, we may not be able to achieve. But if we do, we stand a chance. Because at the end of the day, if you look at how the Kenyan election panned out, there was a strong sense of maturity exercised by the electorate. And very much in a sense that, unlike what we see in our backyard that erodes the quality of democracy that we get, or the quality of the leaders that we get out at the end of the day, the Kenyan election was influenced less and less by monetization and more by issues at hand. And so if we can invest in raising the consciousness of our people to focus more on electing leaders that are fronting issues, that are standing for the good of the country, and not people that are looking for a way to make ends meet, people that are looking for income or for a job, for that matter. That is where we're going to be able to find, to get the quality that gets to be, succumb to the dollars that were put in the accounts that you're talking about at the end of the day.
Okay,
yes.
All right. Now we want to find out, at the end of the day, the rule of power is here, and of course it has to be applied here and there. Mr. Katana, I would like you to help us understand exactly what the role of judiciary, what role it plays towards strengthening democracy that we are looking at for the future of Uganda.
Like I mentioned at the beginning, that judiciary, for starters, maybe for the benefit of our viewers who may need to understand what is this animal called judiciary, we are referring to the institution of the courts of law. in Uganda, I think it is called a sigedamuzi. And like the name suggests, its key role is to ensure that there is justice, there is fairness, and there are key stakeholders. There are many stakeholders in democratization process: judiciary, legislature, and executive. And these must be independent institutions that mutually support each other. The judiciary has a higher responsibility, in my view. The Constitution gives it a higher responsibility in ensuring, for example, because what are the indicators of democracy? The government is open, it is accountable, there is respect for human rights, among other things. So the judiciary has a very high responsibility to ensure that those parameters are met through a number of ways. One of them is exercise of judicial power and authority. You have seen many times people go to the Constitutional Court to seek the interpretation of court that certain provisions or actions of government are unconstitutional. And then court is called upon to exercise that authority to declare and determine that those actions are indeed constitutional or unconstitutional. So the judiciary has a very big role to play in that respect, to exercise boldness, to make sure that it is guided by the law, to make sure that it rejects intimidation and interference from other actors, and make sure that the decision made is fair, is in accordance with the law, and aligns well with the aspirations of the people of Uganda as captured in our constitution. Because that still, much as it has been watered down, it still represents the national consensus that was reached at through a process, a consultative process. And our constitution says that this is the supreme law of the land, and gives, even the judiciary exercises that authority on behalf of the people of Uganda. It derives legitimacy from that provision and from the people of Uganda. So in that respect, it has a responsibility to make sure that it does so bearing in mind the aspirations of the people, the law, and things that I have mentioned. Secondly, it also has powers to do what we call judicial review. For example, the actions of government, actions of entities. Courts have authority to review these decisions. The aggrieved party goes to court and seeks a decision of court, a declaration that this decision is unlawful. It can quash that decision, it can order that the person be granted a hearing, and things of that nature. So if court does so, and in accordance with the law, then it is helping in deepening democracy. The other tool that is available, a bit controversial, is judicial activism, where courts even depart from precedent, from what is in the legislation, and go ahead to look at the socio-economic. I have seen, for example, rulings where court even ordered the government that it should enact a comprehensive legal framework guiding evictions. I think it is Muhindo versus Attorney General. It is a 2016 case. So you see that in addition to interpreting and making the declaration, it has gone ahead to make recommendations to government.
Speaking of recommendations, we've had, of course, the election petition cases before, Kizza Besigye versus President Museveni, over and over again. And our very own courts here have actually come out, not just with rulings, but recommendations to the different stakeholders, the Electoral Commission being one of them, government being the other. But those recommendations seem to be left on paper as recommendations and not being picked up by the necessary stakeholders to aid us in deepening democracy. Why is that the case?
One of the limitations that the judiciary faces in playing its role in deepening democracy is that it does not have power to implement its orders. So it gives orders, but another arm of government is supposed to implement. And so when that arm of government doesn't, then what does judiciary do? So it's one of the limitations. But if you want, for example, you compare it with Kenya. For example, the technology deployed and the digital processes deployed came as a result of recommendations of a Supreme Court ruling, which resulted into formation of a commission, which recommended that there is a need for digitalization, and the result we have is the system that they relied on, which in my view helped to improve on transparency and credibility and trust of the electoral process.
Okay.
So the challenge we have here is that these recommendations are never implemented. And it's not only just those recommendations. Courts of law in Uganda have made decisions, for example, granting people bail, and the security agencies rearrest them. That is interference with the work of the judiciary. So what we need to know is that while the judiciary has a role to play in fighting for, in deepening democracy in a country, that role is aided by an environment, enabling environment, which many times relates to the goodwill, the political goodwill of the leader.
Okay.
We have had incidents where the president of this country addresses rallies and guides courts on how they should handle bail applications. And so the result is that you have people
who's supreme.
Exactly. You have people like the Honorable Sewanya and Honorable Segirinya rotting in jail because courts are afraid of making an order, because previously they made orders releasing them on bail. They were rearrested, and then the president has been making all public declarations imposing restrictions. And unfortunately, we may not have very bold and strong leadership in the judiciary to stand up to the president and tell him that you are crossing the line.
Perhaps we do have a bold young people, African Youth Development Initiative. I think it's doing a good job on the ground in terms of aiding young people get involved in development policies and processes here in Uganda, making that a reality. What has been the response of young people towards such processes as electoral processes?
I would say it's been one of mixed. It's been mixed results, where you get young people. You build the confidence, or you build the consciousness of young people to get to understand that it's first of all their right and their responsibility to the nation to participate in this process and make their choice of the leaders that they would want. And then, so as you build, this consciousness, this confidence, young people get excited, and of course, together with the other attendant intervening factors like, charismatic leaders within the space who kind of, again, ignite hope in the hearts and the minds of young people to go and participate. But then within the context, you get to see young people being targeted. For example, you could, a case in point is the previous election, where young people were targeted by the security agencies, being accused of all manner of things, being incarcerated, being tortured, and all this. And you know, these, at the end of the day, get to scare off young people from participating in the elections. But also beyond that, there are other challenges within that, much as we do play our part, kind of intervene. For example, in terms of making the electoral processes inclusive for people with disabilities, for example, that has been and remains a challenge. And we've been on a countrywide kind of consultative process where we've been, picking the views of young people on what they feel or what they think should be done by the different stakeholders, especially the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, the Parliament, we've talked about the judiciary, but most importantly, I was going to call it the independent, the Electoral Commission I think it is still called the Electoral Commission of Uganda, in as far as making, electoral processes, especially on election day, inclusive in terms of providing for sign language interpreters, providing for assistive braille, for example, facilities for those that, because in terms of disability we have different disabilities, but then the officials provide for only I think sign language interpretation, but then there are other things that impede young people with disabilities from participating, which are not addressed. But beyond that, I think we can only try our best, but like Council says, everyone has to play their role in order for us to realize the aim that we need to achieve.
Indeed, we do have the judiciary playing their role, but as Council alluded to, they're limited by anything that happens outside the courts. Is really they don't have powers over it. Whatever happens within the court, that's where their power lies. And I guess the point that has been strongly made loud this morning is the separation of powers and how paramount that is in deepening democracy for us here in Uganda, and also the whole integration of different agencies and stakeholders in these processes, such as the electoral process. Everyone knowing their lane and working within their lane, but respectfully, especially towards human rights and also the freedoms of people that are participating in such processes. Well, in the future, I hope that as Uganda we can pick out a lesson or two and be able to implement them, and perhaps one day we too shall be like Kenya, and by the rule of law we shall continuously have deepened democracy, free fair elections, and good governance across the bar. Well, that's all we could have for you in our Kickstarter. We take a short breather, and when we return we head over to Karamoja and the cry for hunger.
You're watching Morning at NTV.